Why was 9/11 a fundamental mistake for the Binladen crime family and their shield and shadow, the Saudi Arabian royal family, who are a crime family? They outed them from the international system by doing 9/11. They wanted to prove to everybody by doing 9/11 that they were so powerful that they could not be touched. Now, this was seized upon, the event of 9/11, by the Israeli right to launch an all-out war on the Islamic terrorism. But so there were certain people inside Israel who would have been pleased that 9/11 happened. But that would be the Likud party, the Israeli right, who are, if they were any other people, would be called what they are, which is Nazis. The Israeli left wants peace, and they've been trying for many years to achieve this. The problem is the Israeli right. The Israeli right immediately helped stoke up the already festering boil that was Bush's policy towards Iraq. But Iraq turned out to be a fundamental mistake for the Israeli right. Why? Bush, his father, Bush Sr., rather than George W. Bush, was the target of an assassination attempt by Saddam Hussein, although it's a crux on the reason why the Iraq War happened. The fundamental reason is that the Bush family has a major beef with Saddam's family, who, as history has shown, Saddam's family were the losers in that battle. But the Israeli right immediately tried to link, and the Israeli firsters in America tried to link 9/11 with Iraq. And that was the charge of the policy was coming from Israel and not the United States. The United States had really no interest, as General Snowcroft himself said, in attacking Iraq. Rather, they wanted still a client state, which would, as Saddam had been, with somebody who was a strong man to keep in power. This manifestation now is Maliki, although he is arguably under the control of the Iranians, who in effect control Iraq. This was why it was a major mistake for the Israelis, because it unleashed forces that they could control or contain. Because fundamentally the Israeli right does not want peace. They are fascists. They want to have a greater Israel that reaches right to the Jordan River. By unleashing Bush on Iraq and the subsequent war, which then led directly to the Iranian involvement in the Lebanon war, which led to a sound Israeli defeat by Hezbollah, who are a terrorist organisation and should not be praised for that, meant that with Obama now in charge of the United States, that the Israelis cannot use a strategy of tension, which they've used to keep their own survival in check for many, many decades, and that is a strategy of tension of playing off the threat of Arab states, powerful Arab states such as Iraq and Egypt and Jordan, to keep a strong military presence and a justifiable military presence for Israel, considering they are only 0.25% of the Arabian land, and they're constantly threatened. So the Israelis do have justifiable security concerns. The problem is these Likudites who are completely out for imperialism in the Middle East. They have used European Americans and European soldiers to achieve those ends. But they have not succeeded, because the Iraq War turned out to be only a Pyrrhic victory for the West. It was a fundamental policy disaster for us, unfortunately. But in the long term, it may be seen as a fundamental victory for the West, because a democracy in Iraq could be possible in some form in the near decades. And the expansion of the European Union into places such as Azerbaijan and even possibly Iran itself at some point in the future, and the development by the EU of a Middle Eastern Union together with a North African Union, could herald the end of Islamic terrorism and a peaceful bringing together of the Middle East, the Western Asia and Europe and North Africa into a kind of Pax Europa, with Israel would obviously be a partner for the EU in that role. Why was 9/11 a fundamental mistake for the Binladen family? Because although it knocked off one of their enemies, Saddam, it unleashed forces that they too, the Bin Laden family, could not contain. That the American advance in Iraq would not be such a quagmire within the first 4 weeks must have been a shock for the Bin Ladens. Also, that the Al Qaeda, their franchise, the Bin Laden's franchise, would be rejected by large sections of the Iraqi people who are Shia, and also the Iraqi version of Al Qaeda in Iraq, proved to be a complete failure in their strategy of tension of you setting Shia and Sunni against each other backfired terribly when the Sunnis, who are secular in Iraq, turned on Al Qaeda, who are Wahhabist Sunnis, Wahhabist Muslims, and also unleashed Iran into Iraq. So therefore both the Israelis and the Bin Ladens were losers. But the biggest reason why the Bin Ladens were losers because of 9/11 and Iraq was because it outed them from the secrecy of the international system. They used to be able to build and demolish buildings all over the world under the suffix of Laden. People thought that they were Dutch, for crying out loud. They used to build buildings all over London. And yet people who believe that there is some kind of conspiracy between Zionist conspiracy, that the Israelis or the Americans did 9/11, are completely missing the point. But the fact is that the Bin Ladens are quite capable of putting bombs in buildings, and they're quite capable of flying suicide pilots, putting suicide teams on planes and flying planes into buildings. There's no reason to look for any other sort of conspiracy other than the conspiracy of the Bin Laden family themselves. The problem in understanding 9/11 is that if there was any kind of Zionist conspiracy, it was not 9/11, it was Iraq. Although Bush was the charge behind that, so it was a Christian and Zionist conspiracy to invade Iraq, although that was not kept as the defining aspect of a conspiracy, that it was secret. It was open in the general public knew that Bush wanted to attack Iraq even before 9/11. Now, what does this mean for Iran? Because Iran now has been left caught catching the ball of a regional supremacy here, because they have now power right up to into Saudi Arabia itself and into Lebanon. The only people who can stop the Bin Laden, the only people who can stop the Bin Ladens is the Israeli left, the European Union and the United States working together. And that's the only way you're going to defeat a trillionaire family that is responsible for the deaths of millions of people around the world who were not outed from the international system when they were committing terrorism on a wide scale for the last 40 years. The Bin Ladens basically control Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. There may be other Arab countries or non-Arab countries that they have a major influence in, and they've definitely had a major influence in the Western world. We need to close down their banking system, have a system of non-political or economic connections around the Bin Laden family, and close them down and put them where they belong, 6 feet under. They have hundreds of thousands of people working for them, and it will take many decades for this to happen, but it must happen for the security of the world. And there must be a European Union-led mission to develop a Middle Eastern Union based on the EU model and a North African Union based on the EU model, and the European Union must expand and develop a system where economic and fundamental natural rights are respected throughout the world. Thank you for listening, and please remember the victims of 9/11 who were killed by the Bin Laden crime family.